My name is Jesse Mechling. I'm the Education Director at the Center for Coastal Studies. We are an independent nonprofit research, education, and rescue organization in Provincetown, Mass, founded in 1976. Before I talk a little bit, what I want to do today is talk about what the center does. Bob talked a little about the history of right whales. I kind of going to talk about the present because right now, where we are located in Cape Cod and where I don't know if all the crew is going to Cape Cod, but some of you probably are, is now become the epicenter. Cape Cod Bay has become the epicenter of right whale, North Atlantic right whale population, and I have a cool little chart that I printed out to show that. But before that, and I know that this is going to be posted maybe for kids, I just wanted to briefly say how I got here, my position. And I've talked to some of you, and I was a huge whale nerd when I was a little kid. In fact, knew more than probably most people today. I had my sights set on being a marine mammologist, not a marine biologist, a marine mammologist. I went various countries to see whales. And then I ran into, on a whale watch out of Provincetown, one of my colleagues and founders of the center, Dr. Charles Stormy Mayo. I went up to him on a whale watch boat. He was a naturalist. The center used to be naturalists on the whale watch boats in Provincetown for, 3 decades. And I told him my interest in being a marine mammologist. I was even looking to go to the College of the Atlantic in Maine when I was like 12 years old. And this is how I know it was Stormy, because it was a long time ago. He said, "What you really want to study is the plankton." Now, at the time, I thought plankton was insignificant whale food. Little did I know how amazing plankton is. And for those who saw the news Tonto, it's amazing stuff. But he didn't share that with me. He said there's no money in being a marine biologist and study plankton, not whales. Well, that really turned me off. Believe it or not, I went to college, I studied something completely different, another subject I really liked. But then about 10 years after, I got back into, I love the ocean, I love marine life, it's a passion of mine. And I found this graduate program that I'd been looking for and went back and got back into marine policy. And then, so instead of becoming marine biologist, I went where the big money is, which was marine education. Because we all know that education is where, especially for a nonprofit, is where you make the big bucks. But he was right about one thing. Plankton is the coolest stuff out there. I spend most of my time talking about plankton whenever I can. I was even in a club in Tenerife talking to the bathroom attendant about plankton, this guy from Nigeria, for half an hour about how cool plankton is, and it truly is the ruler of our worlds. But I also spend a lot of time talking about right whales. About 2 months of my year when right whales come to Cape Cod Bay is I spend my time talking about right whales and educating the public on right whales. Also, I talk about plankton, but Cape Cod has become the epicenter of right whales, and we're fortunate at the center. So as a research organization, we started in 1976. 3 founders, 2 of which are still with the center, Stormy and Dr. Graham Geis. And Stormy's first wife passed away in the 80s, unfortunately. But in 1984, we began our right whale study, our habitat study of Cape Cod Bay. Now, they had known that right whales used Cape Cod Bay as a feeding area, a spring feeding area since the 50s. And the center started its nearly 40-year, nearly 40-year program looking at the habitat and mainly looking at the food. Right? What are they coming there for? They're coming for food. And a interesting paper that will be coming out, it's in the process. I was told not to, but I won't share. Well, I'll just share like the general stuff of it. Basically, what we find, we found a number of different things over the years. One, how much food it takes for right whales to start feeding, which is about 4,000 copepods per cubic meter. Their baleen size is about the same mesh size as some plankton go through the the baleen. It's about the relatively same mesh size as the tow we were doing. So they filter out a certain type of plankton, and it's really focused on 3 types of copepods. One is called Centropoges, one is called Pseudocalanus, and the other one is Calanus finmarchicus. And they really come to Cape Cod Bay and then feed on those 3 species through the season of feeding in Cape Cod, which is generally January to May. And they really they target 70% of what they eat is those 3 species, and they go from one to the next to the next. And in one year where one of those species is more abundant, they'll focus on one, and the other year they'll focus on the other. But that's really the cycle that we have found. Typically, what they do, because it takes a lot of energy as a whale to feed, especially for a right whale. And actually, I will take that. Can I take that model for a second? And can I take your blue notebook for a second there? So the coolest thing the coolest behavior of seeing a right whale is when a right whale comes up to feed at the surface, and you see, as I describe it, a black rock moving at the surface, just like this. This takes a lot of energy, and so they really need a lot of food. And what we find is typically they will get into big patches of this, up to between 12 and 20,000 copepods per cubic meter is the patches where they like to feed. Some really big years on Cape Cod. 2017 was a big year where we had 198 right whales seen on one day. So I think at that time, I don't know how many in the world, but that was more than half of the population seen on right one day. That year we were finding 120,000 copepods per cubic meter in parts of Cape Cod Bay. So it was a really big year for food and for right whales. 2 of those species, the Pseudocalanus and Centropoges, are native to Cape Cod Bay. They live there all year. Calanus finmarchicus, which is the lipid-rich, so it has very good oil sacs in it that the right whales like, gets moved in by the currents, and that's the species that in the Bay of Fundy is no longer there in abundance for right whales to feed in the summer, but it gets moved in by currents into Cape Cod Bay, so that's why Cape Cod Bay is still a very important feeding area. The second area of research that we do is monitoring for right whales. We have an aerial survey team. We also have 2 research boats, or a research boat and a rescue boat. That since our aerial survey team has been going out since 1997, flying track lines across Cape Cod Bay and the backside of Cape Cod, monitoring right whales during right whale season. Now, one of the important pieces of data that came from that research is that in 1994, right whales were their critical habitat as being an endangered species was created in Cape Cod Bay, although there was a portion of Cape Cod Bay that was not thought to be critical habitat. They just didn't go there, apparently. But of course, what our aerial survey showed is that, of course, they go there. They use the whole bay, and they actually swim on the backside of Cape Cod, and they go in the Mass Bay, and they go all over. And so through that data, those data, and other data from folks like the New England Aquarium, that critical habitat was expanded in 2016 to include a much, and I'm sure you will talk about that, a much larger area. So our aerial team has just completed recently their 1,000th flight over Cape Cod Bay, and they are the team that provides a lot of information that goes to the North Atlantic Right Whale Catalog, and the great work that the New England Aquarium is doing. And one of the things that we have seen in the past, really starting in kind of 2015, 2016, is as our right whale population has been declining, we are seeing an increase in the percentage of the population coming to Cape Cod. And I have a little graph that I printed up, and I will pass this around. But what this is starting in 2000 and going to this year, although this year's incomplete because we're still not done seeing them, and we're kind of backlogged with individuals. What you can see here is this is basically the percentage of the population of right whales and you can see it's pretty much been increasing. This is not all Cape Cod Bay, but this is around Cape Cod, so some of it might be on the backside. It's not all aerial data. Some of it is boat-based data with our research boat and our rescue boat. But what you'll see is this trend is increasing so much that in 2022 we had 80% of the entire world's population around our waters. That's how important it is. 2020 is a little bit of an outlier. As you'll see also, there's a little asterisk there because this little thing called COVID happened in March. But much to the credit of the team, they were out flying probably 2 weeks after the whole world shut down. They lost about 2 to 3 weeks, but they were back in a small plane flying a few weeks after everyone shut down. And most everyone else at the center wasn't doing anything, but the aerial team got out there because it was right whale season. So even that year, they still recorded, I think it was it 55% of the population. But again, they missed a peak. They missed a good, really important 2 to 3 weeks of the season, the middle to end of March, beginning of April. So coupled with our habitat data, our aerial survey data really shows that how critical a place Cape Cod Bay is for this population now. As I said, I for this time of year, March and April, I lead groups out. I took about 200 people out this spring to look for whales from shore. We were lucky on about 4 trips where we had the best being 100 yards away. We had 3 skim feeding right whales, probably 24 right whales in the water. So it's a wonderful place to go and talk about right whales. It's an amazing place for people to come see one of simply the most endangered species on the planet, right? I tell people, good luck going to find a snow leopard. Here you can stand on a beach in Cape Cod, and there are a lot more snow leopards than right whales, and see like 30% of the population in one view. The other interesting thing that our aerial team has observed, and 3 years do not a trend make, this is on the backside, is that we are starting to see a larger percent of the moms and calves come to Cape Cod Bay and stay there for a while. If you can see here, back to 2000s, and some of these years there were only like 4 calves and we had 1, so it's 25%. So it's some of the years there's not numbers, but just the percentage of them. So we've had 12 calves born this year, 1 death, correct? 9 of those mothers, so 9 out of the 11 living mothers and calves have been seen in Cape Cod Bay. Last year last year was 75%, so yeah, so 12 I think we saw last year. So for the past 3 years, we've been seeing more moms and calves come into Cape Cod Bay and stay there for a while. And, I have my theories on that. What's that?
I said, are they smart enough to know that they're safer?
That's my theory. Yeah, absolutely. Cape Cod, there's speed restrictions. There's no gear. It's a less stressful place, is what I say. It's a less stressful place. So they're learning, so hopefully that will be good for them. And there's certainly food there, so hopefully that will be good. The other major third piece with right whales is our disentanglement team. We were the first group in the world to free a swimming entangled whale. There are people up in Canada were swimming whales in nets, like kind of trap. But we in 1984 disentangled a free swimming humpback whale. So our disentanglement program is almost 40 years as well. We have spread those techniques all over the world. In fact, one of the David Matilla, who was on the first disentanglement, took the techniques, which were old whaling techniques, to Hawaii, and David now actually works partially with us and through the International Whaling Commission to spread those techniques to train people all over the world. In fact, this year, for the first time in a few years, we're going to have some interns coming from Kenya to come and train with us. And one of the interesting things I've heard him say is that all these places, they didn't think they had a whale entanglement problem until there was someone to call. And they all realized they all have whale entanglement problems when now they have someone to call. Before there was no one to call, now all these places have someone to call. All these places found out they have whale entanglement problems. Not just, everywhere, every large whale. So our disentanglement team is it's kind of a Band-Aid effect, right? They're just going after one whale to try to get gear off. It's certainly not the optimal way. To have them not entangled in the first place is really the best case scenario. But I just wanted to mention, looking on their website, they had 24 open cases of entangled right whales. And Amy, maybe you know this, longest seen was a whale called Kingfisher. I don't know if Kingfisher is presumed.
Kingfisher is presumed dead. He was seen entangled in Florida in 2004. He had picked up gear in Maine and swam down to Florida with the gear, got disentangled, but had multiple wraps around his flipper, like 11 wraps of rope. And he was a 2-year-old when disentangled, so he grew into that gear and it got very raw, and he lived with it for 11 years before he then disappeared.
Yeah, so 2015 is the last sighting, and again, presumed dead. The most recent was a whale, 4545, a young female, a should-be breeding age female at 8 years old, that our team was first seen in February entangled. Our team had 2 attempts. The first attempt, they were able to put on a telemetry buoy to track it. After about a week or 10 days, they actually tracked it east of Cape Cod. They went out, they got some gear off, but in getting that gear off, it also shed the telemetry buoy. And so she swam off still with lethal gear in her mouth, now not being able to be found. So hopefully our aerial team will see her again, and they will make another attempt on her. But again, just one of 24 open cases of entangled right whales out there, some probably presumed dead. One actually I read, which was really great news, was 4501. I don't know if that one has a name. I don't know if you know that one. Was just this month seen gear free south of the Cape and the Islands. So that was a bit of good news. And then you may have heard of the whale last year. In fact, I think it's the only known entangled whale to have given birth, which was snow cone. Snow cone is a whale that's still entangled and was last seen in September of last year off of Nantucket. And snow cone has been entangled multiple times in her life as well, right?
Right, and when she was seen in September, it was a new entanglement.
A new entanglement, yeah.
After she had given birth while entangled from her previous entanglement.
Yeah, given birth,
So it's sort of a...
come up from Florida, went to Canada. Yeah.
She wasn't with her calf.
She wasn't with her calf in Canada.
That
Yep.
would have been a very young calf.
And we did see her last year in Cape Cod Bay with her calf, and attempts were made. Again, some gear, but not. Right whales, as Bob said, they're not docile. They're notoriously hard to disentangle. In fact, if we find them, which is always, that's the biggest part in disentangling a whale, right? Is finding the whale again. We only have about a 50% success rate with right whales. They're just notoriously difficult. So as the head of our team, Scott Landry, says, this is just kind of a Band-Aid approach to fixing these this problem with the whales. But they do, it does help that individual, right? It does help that individual whale. And I guess with 340 helping an individual is pretty good. And the last piece of study I just wanted to mention is a new study that we're looking at, and that's what we thank you, the science crew and everyone for helping today. We are, one of our researchers, Dr. Agnes Minnemeyer, is conducting a stable isotope project. And I don't know raise your hand if you know what stable isotopes are. A few, good, okay. So, well, please don't ask me to explain, but basically everything out there has isotopes. Some are stable, some are not. It's a way to, in the case of Agnes's work, they take samples of the water around the world, and you can find out the stable isotopes looking at oxygen. She's using 4 stable isotopes from oxygen, nitrogen, sulfide, and carbon. And so what she's doing is she and a colleague went down to the Smithsonian last year, and they took pieces of baleen from from whales that had died. They were able to extract those elements and look at the stable isotopes. And so what they're trying to create is a historic and possibly current migration route and historic feeding areas of these animals by looking at stable isotopes, in the water, and then what they found in the whale's baleen. And so these plankton samples that we collected it's to help ground truth, because they collected from the water, right? But these plankton samples are to help ground truth this. And one of the things that Agnes gave a presentation on this a couple weeks ago, with one stable isotope, generally you can get a big range, but the more you add, the closer you can get. So I think this project will be really interesting in telling us where at least those whales, from the samples that they had, where they used to feed. And we can compare that to where whales maybe feed today. So it'll be really interesting, and also the migratory routes. So that's what we took the samples that are drying now for. Yeah, so we also, we'll just mention the center. Again, we're really involved when the whales come to Cape Cod Bay. As it's an epicenter, we've been out with some Canadian researchers trying to use satellites to actually identify individual whales. And in fact, the paper came out last year from just that they identified an individual whale via a satellite. And one of our aerial team was a member of that, author on that paper. We're also doing with the University of Oregon, Oregon State University of Oregon, an eDNA study in Cape Cod Bay, again looking at the type of food that's there, and maybe helping to predict when whales will come in there. So a lot of amazing research. I don't know. I think by the time you get to Cape Cod, they might still be around. If you go around into Bass Bay, they might still be there. Who knows? You have a good chance of seeing them. But Cape Cod is, maybe historically they weren't the place. Well, before the New Bedford, they might have been, but after New Bedford, they probably weren't the place where they were being hunted, but they're certainly the place now that is really the center of the right whale. We see a lot of them. This year, I said percentage, but this year we've had just under 60, but we've had 190 whales, individual whales seen in the bay so far this year. And again, the cool trend is that the mom and calves, and I'll pass it around for you to take a look, and the mom and calves are on the back. And I will say my first time ever seeing a right whale was actually a very weird year just in general for whales around Cape Cod. Was 1986. I was on a 57-foot 3-masted schooner called Whale Sail, sailing around the Cape and Islands, and there were right whales that hung out off of Race Point all summer long. There were no humpbacks, they were all off of Chatham, and there was an orca in Provincetown Harbor. Very weird year, but that was the first time I ever saw right whales, was 1986 in July off of Race Point in Provincetown.